The story begins with men in suits in the alley, beating someone. Our protagonist is badly injured but still has cigarettes in his mouth. Park Kang-T told the men that it hurts so much, but one of the men just told him that he'll give him some time to smoke his last cigarette. So he grabbed his lighter to light up his cigarette while thanking the man very much. The lighter released a fire and he started smoking his cigar. The man told the bald man to send off his brother easily in one shot, to which the bald man agreed. Then the bald man apologized to him, but he just spat out his cigar and told the bald man that he knows they are just doing what they are told to do. He knows that his life has been full of anger and despair, and he is still attached to it. Boxing was everything to him, and he had everything like height, punching power, and star quality. In high school, he was even called a promising prospect in the boxing world. But he couldn't ignore the provocations that came his way because he couldn't control his young blood. He was told that he could never box again and was shut down. He thinks there must have been other ways, and he might have been able to make a comeback because he knows that, at the very least, there was a way to make a living as a boxer. But he also knows that it is useless to regret it now. Still, if he had the chance, even just once more, he wants to do boxing one more time. Suddenly, he heard someone telling him that he was ashamed to be a boxing apprentice like him. But then, someone called him Callie to wake him up and asked if he was dead. Then someone shouted that they didn't care if he died and that they should go, making him wonder who it was. 3 boys were panicky, running away, leaving a young man bleeding on the ground. The young man's eyes were empty, but then they woke up when Park Kang-T's soul entered the young man's body and he sprang up to catch his breath. Then he looked at his shaking hand, wondering what it was, knowing that he definitely died from being stabbed, and who was that body? A few days later, the man told the men that the losers of the match go to the mine, but if they won, they stay there in that August boxing apprentice school. The instructor named Nixar also told them that if they didn't want to go to the mine, they should train like they were going to die and listen carefully to the pairs he was assigning them to now. Then Nixar begins pairing Torres and Meros, Undad and Bizon, Kizzo and Damien, Johnny and Caesar, and lastly, Slit and Callie. Then told them that the pairs called now would have a match in a week. The huge man laughingly replied to Nixar that it was clear, but the skinny man asked their captain if he was telling them to die. He knows that Nixar called the inferiors against the superiors, and he can see Nixar's intention. The mine is a dangerous place where many people still die from accidents or lung disease in the 21st century, and the environment there is even worse, so he knows that he must avoid going to the mine at all costs. Suddenly, Nixar called his name, making him jump in shock, and told him to follow him because he had something to ask him to do separately. One of the superiors asked if Kali was getting special treatment again, and the other superior furiously replied that Kali is a jerk who can't even keep up with training. On the other hand, somewhere else, Nixar told him that he had submitted his name to the owner for discharge. He asked Nixar if it was true, but he was surprised that he was calm. Nixar told him that he was not a boxer, and he had a small build, so the same goes for the mine. He'll die soon, making him think that with a body like his, he'll die in less than a year. Then Nixar told him that he'd recommend to the owner that he be sold to a different master. But he told Nixar that he'd go to the match in a week. Nixar asked him if he is really Callie, because if it was usual, he would have already cried and cried. But he firmly told Nixar that he will definitely become a boxer. Then he confidently glared at Nixar, making Nixar smile, and told him that if that's the case, he wouldn't say anything more, but if he changed his mind, he could come to him any time. Then, he silently walked outside, thinking about Nixar, questioning if he's really Callie. But he knows that he is not because until recently, he was a gangster named Park Kang. Got a second chance as a boy named Callie, which is the opportunity to do boxing again. But he knows that his current body is frail with weak bones and insufficient stamina. His growth spurt is late, and his punches are weak. In addition, it seems that Callie has been subjected to a lot of bullying, and it must have been because of that frail body that it wasn't seen. This makes him wonder why he got a second chance with that body. Suddenly, someone called him from the side, and the superiors were glaring at him, making him realize that it was starting again. Then Slit punched his face and kicked him away while telling him that he has never liked a bastard like him. The fact that the instructor took him in as an exception is also a problem. Then Slit asked him what he was bragging about, his father being a champion, and told him that he should just die because he was just a weak, insignificant bastard. The other man who was looking at him thought he was pathetic, but then they noticed that he was still standing up, making them can't believe it because they know that Callie would have been beaten to a pulp if it was usual. While he was wondering how pathetic the owner of his body must have been, Slit teasingly told him that he only had to look at his face for a week, but he agreed and jokingly told Slit that it was because he was going to be dragged to the mine. This made Slit angry and he launched his fist to punch him again. He was stunned, realizing it was a massive fist, and with his current body, it was impossible to dodge it. He wondered how he could dodge it, but then he was surprised to see the fist slowly approaching him. Seeing it coming, he managed to dodge the punch in time, and he wondered if he had truly dodged it. The man who was observing them was also surprised and wondered what was happening. Slit became even more furious because he had avoided his attack and launched his fist once again. It was clear that he could see the trajectory of the fist, so he dodged the attack once more and skillfully avoided other attacks while getting closer to Slit, as he could also see when the guard was down. Then he punched Slit's chest, making Slit stumble back, and the other superiors were shocked. But Slit grabbed his shirt and aimed for him, angrily calling him a weakling, then launched his fist toward his face, hitting him hard. After this, the superiors walked away with Slit, telling him that nobody liked him being cocky. The man who had been watching them from the start observed for a while and then turned around to leave, leaving him alone on the ground, badly injured. However, he smiled and laughed heartily. He wondered why he hadn't noticed until now that something as important as body weight in boxing was eye-hand coordination and reflexes. The hand-eye coordination that can see every grain of sand that falls and follows its movement, and the reflexes that dodge all the punches. He knew he had a pretty useful corner, and swore that he was not going to the mine because he would win and survive. 20 years ago, there was a rising revolt of the armored gladiators, and it was a challenging situation that even regular troops struggled to cope with. The kingdom, which had barely suppressed the rebellion, later abolished the slave gladiator system, and that's how fighters were born. He found out that in this world, the audience only took pleasure in fights where opponents were destroyed with fists. Moreover, his current body made it easy for him to get injured. A man told him that if he was already exhausted, he could run slowly, but he replied with a cough, insisting that he was fine. He knew that he had to do everything to survive because in that place, lacking strength meant certain death. Moments later, Nixar shouted to them that it was over and they should stop. This left him catching his breath in exhaustion, feeling frustrated, knowing that he could run better when he was drinking alcohol or smoking. On the other hand, Nixar, who observed him, wondered how the kid who always lagged behind was now in the middle of the pack. If Callie had been like this before, they wouldn't have let him go, making Nixar wonder what had happened to Callie. Then Nixar overheard one of the men asking his friend why Callie had run with all his might today after getting beaten up. The friend inquired back if he thought Callie was acting a bit strange after his head got hurt. Nixar asked them what they meant by Callie's head getting hurt, leaving the two men shocked. He inquired further if Callie got beaten by another group, and the men replied that they believed Callie got beaten harder than usual. They thought Callie was dead because he was bleeding from the head, nose, and more. Nixar wondered if it was changing Callie because he felt the specter of death. He knew they needed to wait and see a little longer, so he ordered the men to run 50 more laps, to which they immediately replied yes. In the afternoon, during individual training, Callie noticed that everyone was working hard to avoid going to the mine. He realized he had to work just as hard, but he understood that the training was ineffective. It was impossible for him to inflict significant damage with his current body. He knew he had to aim for a crucial area like the jaw, because a well-placed jaw hit could shake the skull and make opponents fall. He needed to perfect his aim for the jaw. A man asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he was in the middle of training. The man questioned why he wasn't training like the others in their training camp. Callie suggested they train in a different style, similar to what they did in their training camp. The man called him cheeky and reminded him that they had been fighters even before he was born, so there was no value in ignoring the veterans. Callie knew that, in that place, boxing was of the slugger type, much like a heavyweight fight in his world. He used to train with that style, but regular training wouldn't help his current body. The man told him to pick up the log and repeat it again and again, but then someone grabbed the man's shoulder and asked him to wait a minute. Then, Nixar asked Kelly if he was learning it from his father, to which he nodded in agreement. Nixar told him that if that was the case, he could use that style in their training camp, and if it was the champion style of training, there was something to learn from it. Then Nixar told him that he could keep that, and he agreed. Nixar thinks Kaviron is a champion, but he wasn't a boxer, and he wonders if Kaviron teaches Callie any other training methods. He also thinks that Callie must have changed after that day, and now Callie feels different. When the sun was about to set, he leaned against the tree tiredly, realizing that he couldn't handle it because he was weak. Then his stomach growled, making him feel hungry, and he craved something sweet. He noticed something above him and saw that he was leaning against an apple tree. He bit into one of the apples and exclaimed that he felt alive. But then someone asked him what he was doing there, and he was surprised to see a noble lady looking at him. He tried to say something, but he was too nervous. The lady told him that if he didn't have an explanation, he should pick an apple for her and come down because she wanted to eat one too. He immediately climbed down and gave her an apple. She took a bite and praised him, then asked him if he wasn't a slave in the training camp and if he didn't know that it was a noble family garden. She reminded him that if he got caught, he would be punished. Shatteringly, he replied that he really didn't know, knowing that if he got hurt, he couldn't compete. She smiled and introduced herself as Azalea Aegist, and her father was Baron Gadolf Aegist, who is his master. She ordered him to say his name, and he replied that he was Kali. She told him that she'd pretend she didn't see what he was doing today because he gave her that apple, but if he got caught again, she'd swing the whip herself. Then she ordered him to quickly leave that place before the others saw him, to which he thanked her and immediately ran away, thinking that it was a close call. Azalea watched him running away and noticed that he was small and looked weak for a boxing. Then she looked at the apple that Callie gave her and ate it while thinking about his name. The next day, Callie was busy training alone with his hands while the superiors were training using the log on the side. Slit noticed that Callie had changed and was attracting everyone's attention with his unconventional training. He also remembered that last day, Callie even hit him, and he knew that if it continued, it would be the end. This made him furiously throw the log he was carrying and ask one of the superiors if the instructor was supposed to come. The man replied that the master called them, so they left. Slit smiled upon hearing this, thinking that there was no harm in testing the opponents in advance. He told everyone that he had to show them who's the boss. Then Slit was about to grab Callie from behind, thinking he'd start with Callie's annoying face and plan to smash Callie to the ground. However, Callie ducked in time to avoid it. He turned around to face Slit and launched his fist towards Slit's jaw, but he stopped in time and surprisingly apologized to Slit. He explained that he was so focused that he didn't notice him next to him. Worriedly, he asked Slit if he hit his face, and Slit replied no, saying he was fine. He told Slit that it was a relief and that he shouldn't get hurt before the match. Slit shook in fear. He told Slit that he'd go back to what he was doing, but knew that Slit was a troublemaker. He remembered that when they were in the organization, he saw his share of guys like Slit. He swore that those who tried to act tough by making others look weak, he would crush them all. On the other hand, the man was busy training with a log, knowing that it wasn't a coincidence. Then the man walked towards Slit and asked Slit if he was worried because he looked pale. Slit shouted and asked the man what he was talking about. He told the man that he was lucky to have a wimp like Callie as his opponent, so nothing could be better than that. The man told Slit that it was true that Callie had changed because usually Callie would whine and annoy them, and they would beat him up. But lately he saw determination in Callie's eyes, indicating that he wouldn't live like before. So, Slit better not be careless and let his guard down. This made Slit surprised, and he couldn't believe that even Torres was paying attention to Callie. Torres smiled upon seeing Slit's reaction and slammed Slit back, telling him that Callie was still Callie, so he shouldn't worry and should just send that trash to the mine. Slit confidently replied, of course, and said it was what he had to do. Meanwhile, in Gadolf's mansion, a man told Nixar that it seemed like the preparations for the match were going well. Nixar replied that they had even started living in the training facility. Gadolf asked Nixar if Torres was the promising one he mentioned and how Torres was. Nixar replied that Torres had a good balance of strength and agility. He was aggressive and skilled, and he had a good eye, which allowed him to overcome his weaknesses. Torres could even aim for the champion title. Gadolf told Nixar that he was looking forward to it and that there was something he wanted him to do, making Nixar ask Gadolf what it was. Gadolf explained that, as they knew, their training center's reputation had been declining and they had been struggling financially. They had to send half of the slaves to the mines due to a lack of funds, so he wanted to invite commoners as spectators and raise some money. He believed that commoners must have missed watching the boxers fight and would surely enjoy it. Then he asked Nixar if he could show them a match worth watching. Nixar replied that he could, all while thinking that Gadolf was his master, but he considered Gadolf incompetent. Nixar knew that the reason the training center's reputation had fallen in the first place was due to Gadolf August Baron's greed. Gadolf had been running the training center for 15 years, and for the first 5 years, he was able to maintain it with the boxers he inherited from his ancestors. However, for the next 10 years, he forced them to fight too much and they died out. August's territory was barren and had little farmland, so he had been relying on the training center's income to support his family. But now, it was not enough either. Nixar thought about how things might have been different if Gadolf hadn't sent young boxers to the Kingdom boxing tournament 2 years ago. Then he remembered a man who had promised him that he would definitely win. But that man had died, making him frustrated. He thought that if Gadolf hadn't done it, the training center might have had a chance to rise again. Azalea told her father that she wanted to watch the match too, and asked if he could prepare one more seat for her. Gadolf asked her what it was for, and questioned whether she had not said she hated it because it was barbaric. She replied that sometimes she thought barbaric things were okay too. Nixar warned Azalea that it might be too stimulating for her, but she insisted that's stimulating. Gadolf chuckled and told his daughter that she really wanted to see it badly. She was not usually interested in fights like these, but she wanted to see for herself how Kali fought. The day of the match arrived, and Kali entered the place, fixing his hand bandage, thinking that finally the time had come. A moment later, someone raised a hand in the air, and the people cheered loudly. Torres thought it was easy, and the match ended. On the other hand, up top, Nixar and Gadolf were watching. Gadolf told Nixar that it was a great fight and instructed him to train Torres well and make him a champion in just 1 year, to which Nixar agreed. Then the instructor shouted that the next and last fight would be between Slit and Kali. Azalea, who was watching the match, noticed that everyone was tall and muscular, but that kid named Kali was as skinny as a bone. She wondered if Kali thought he could become a fighter with that small body. Nixar told her that for a fighter, physique is an absolute factor because physical strength is directly related to power. However, there is still a way. Slit asked Kali why he didn't just surrender now, as if he fought Slit till the end, he wouldn't have good health anymore. But Kali told Slit that if his ability matched the way he talked, he'd already be a champion. He knows it's not that simple, and he can't find a place to hit Slit. He understands that the most significant challenge is the difference in physique. It won't do any good damage if he hits Slit's torso with his fist, so he needs to target Slit's jaw. To do that, he needs 2 things. Slit launched his fist to punch him, but he dodged it. He thought that first, he needed to make Slit's upper body bend like it was now. He continuously avoided Slit's punches, making the people watching shout at him furiously, telling him not to just run away and calling him a scaredy cat. They asked him what he was doing. Slit thought that by getting provoked by the viewers, he had almost lost all his stamina, but he wondered why Kali was fine. Then Slit launched his fist at him once again, calling him a small bastard. Kali was surprised, but he knew that it was part of his plan. He made Slit keep attacking him, which caused Slit to lose most of his stamina faster than Kali, who was just avoiding the attacks. Second, when Slit would lose his guard, he could strike his jaw, but then Slit grabbed his shoulder and launched his fist at his side. Kali was surprised because it was cheating. Slit's fist hit his side, and a few of his ribs broke. He shouted in pain and fell to the ground. The people cheered for Slit, while Kali wondered if everyone knew Slit was cheating because Slit had grabbed him with all his fingers, not his gloves. The instructor began to count down, and he thought that he never expected this to happen. He wondered what he should do. When the instructor counted down to 3, he pushed himself to stand up. Fortunately, he managed to get to his feet in time, although he wondered if his ribs were broken and how many were affected. However, he knew that wasn't the problem for now. The instructor asked him if he could still continue the fight, and he thought that he had already died once, so he would survive now. Slit told him that he'd regret standing up, but he just glared at Slit, knowing that his ribs were already broken and he couldn't move freely. Then Slit launched his fist toward him again, making him think that it was the worst situation, and now that it had come to this, he would do whatever it took. He met Slit's fist using his head, causing Slit to shout in pain. Slit was surprised, and his hand was hurt too. He launched towards Slit, realizing that he needed to attack him. Slit, angrily, was about to attack him again, but he dodged it and saw that the chance was now his. He punched Slit's jaw with all his might, making Slit stagger back a little. But Slit just smiled at him and asked if he thought only one of his punches would kill him. Suddenly, Slit collapsed and fell to the ground. The instructor began to count him down while the viewers were shocked and confused. When the countdown reached 0 and Slit didn't stand up, the instructor announced that the winner was Callie. The viewers were astonished and asked what was happening, but he was just glad that he was still alive. He swore that he wouldn't let his second chance at life go to waste. A week later, the slave traders arrived and half of the apprentices were sent to the mine. The only exception among the inferior students was him. Now there were only a little over 10 people left in the training ground, so the training center was quiet. Later at August's mansion, Nixar told him that the shackles would be released when he returned to the training center. He looked around because it was his first time coming to August's mansion. Nixar asked him how his body was, and he replied that he was fine. Then he excused himself to ask Nixar why the lady had called him. Nixar replied that she seemed to be interested in him after the last match. A few minutes later in Azalea's room, she greeted him and told him that they were meeting again. Then she ordered Nixar to stay outside for a while, and Nixar, confused, replied, "Okay." After Nixar left, she told him to sit there, but he told her that he was fine. She told him not to refuse as she didn't ask twice. He mentioned that he heard she had called him, and she responded by throwing some fruits at him, telling him that he was a bit impatient and should have some fruits. They began to talk, and he ate the fruits she had given, which made her look at him with a smile. Then she explained that she had called him because she had something to ask him. She inquired if he knew that slaves had no right to refuse. He replied yes, while thinking that Azalea was hard to read. She told him that he was amazing in the last match and did well with his thin arms. She also mentioned his one shot, but her father said it was luck and coincidence. She asked him if it wasn't, making him ponder that she was smart and quick because Slit's punch was a coincidence, but then he told her that he shook his head, which left her confused as to what he meant by shook. He explained that if they hit the chin accurately with their fists, the head would shake, and the person would lose temporary control of their body. But it only applied when the impact was strong enough. She asked if he aimed and attacked, to which he replied yes. She smiled and praised him, then told him that she looked forward to his future moves, so he should keep winning and become a professional boxer. She also mentioned that if he became a champion, he might become a free person. He looked at his hands and the shackles fall to the ground, and thinks about what it meant to be a free person. The afternoon training session arrived, and Torres was training seriously while thinking about freedom because it was his goal. He swore that he would definitely achieve freedom. When Torres was 14 years old, Nixar told him that he would become strong enough. Otherwise, Nixar wouldn't have brought him from being a farmhand. He also had a natural physique and fighting spirit, so he should work hard to become a champion and a free person. He threw the log on the ground while thinking that he used to dislike guys like Callie who did pathetic things every day without a goal. However, when Callie suddenly changed, beats lit, and survived, he realized that they never know what will happen in the world. Then someone told him that lately Callie was acting up and they should teach him a lesson. Because of cowardly Callie, Slit had to go to the mine. A man named Kijo, with the nickname Mantis, told Torres that they should go beat up Callie. Torres replied that he was done and didn't care anymore. This made Kijo ask if he really didn't care and say that it was boring. Torres thought that if Callie wanted to change himself, he wouldn't bother Callie because he was just. On the other hand, Callie was busy in a corner of the training room alone. He noticed that his ribs were completely healed now. He had started exercising around the time he recovered and had gained some muscle too. Then someone called him and told him that he had come out of the training ground after a long time. He just thought to himself that he had been wondering when they'd show up. Kijo asked him if it was fun to win easily, and he sighingly replied that it would be troublesome if they got hurt. Kijo teasingly told him not to be too scared because he'd go easy on him. However, he corrected Kijo, saying it was troublesome if he got hurt. This made Kijo angry, and he launched his fist to attack him, but he jumped backward in time to avoid it. Kijo tried to punch him again, but he avoided it once more while launching a counterattack, then hit Kijo's jaw. Kijo coughed out blood and slowly fell. He was thinking that Kijo must have thought he won by pure luck. Then he told them in his mind that they were overconfident. With tall height and overwhelming reach, it felt like facing someone with a spear. His long jabs and punches made it nearly impossible to approach. He knew that having a long reach was a significant advantage. But Kijo had a large movement and a bent swing that didn't allow him to take full advantage of the reach. It meant that Kijo was essentially a big punching bag. He understood that he shouldn't give Kijo any breaks and needed to maintain the pressure, so he continued to punch Kijo. However, two more men suddenly appeared behind him, ready to attack. This surprised him, but he managed to avoid their attacks, wondering if the three of them were coming at him. Kijo told him not to get cocky with the punch he had landed by chance. Frustrated, he asked Kijo if he was resorting to numbers because he was at a disadvantage. This enraged Kijo, who tried to punch him, but he skillfully avoided it. Unfortunately, another man kneed him from behind, making him realize that they were willing to gang up on him to maintain their self-esteem. He fell to the ground and looked up at them, recalling that he hadn't been much different from them before. He asked Kijo why he was making a fool of himself in a one-on-one fight, and told him that if he wanted to gang up on someone, he should have done it from the start. Kijo asked Torres why he was on Kali's side, and Torres replied that he didn't take anyone's side. He was simply annoyed by the guy who had been beaten by Kali and was now acting up. Kijo shouted that he hadn't been beaten and had just let his guard down for a moment. Torres challenged Kijo to have a one-on-one fight again, with him as the referee. Kijo confidently accepted, and then he gave Kijo a menacing glare with his sharp eyes, which made Kijo jump in horror, wondering if that kid was Kali. Kijo attacked him, but he easily avoided it and pointed out that it was a slow punch, finding it strange that Kijo couldn't dodge it. He continued to punch Kijo's side, and Kijo raised his fist to attack him again, telling him to shut up. Once more, he easily avoided Kijo's punches and told Kijo that he was wasting movements as well. Then he launched his fist toward Kijo's face, saying that Kijo was only showing his weakness. He punched Kijo's jaw, making Kijo dizzy, and he collapsed to the ground face first. Torres noticed that Kali looked like an experienced boxer. He knew that Kali's father was a champion, so Kali must have some talent. Kali called Torres, but Torres told him that they had nothing to do with each other. Still, Kali asked Torres if he didn't hate him and why he helped him. Torres just turned around, asking him if he had to explain that to someone like him, and told him to just get lost now. After that incident, there were no more guys who picked on him blatantly, and they implicitly acknowledged that Kali was one of the boxing apprentices. Meanwhile, in the August Mansion guest reception room, Gadolf shouted at someone not to worry and just proceed with the match as usual. Then someone came out of the room with a smile, leaving Nixar surprised. Nixar walked inside, calling Gadolf, and reminded Gadolf that he had told him to refuse that match because they only had apprentice boxers on their side. But Gadolf angrily asked him if he could stand it and told him that Dorman hadn't brought any proper boxers, so they might win if they did well. Nixar told Gadolf that there were two ways to handle it, either prepare the best members and fight, or send out a sacrificial lamb for the next round. But Gadolf angrily ordered him to pick the best three and come because he wanted to see Baron Dorman lose his temper. Nixar wondered how much more Gadolf had to ruin the training center before he came to his senses. He realized that if aces like Taurus became disabled, the training center would be in jeopardy. He also noted that they had 3 days left to train the aces and prepare for the upcoming match. Later, Nixar called Taurus, Kijo, and Kali to inform them that he had decided to train them and put them in a match against Dorman's training camp in 3 days. He chose them because they were the ones whom he and the other instructors believed were the best. Torres asked Nixar if he thought the team he was assembling would win, and Nixar remained silent for a moment, thinking about Gadolf. Finally, he told them that they had a ridiculously small chance of winning. Worried, Kijo asked Nixar if they would die if they lost, and Nixar replied that Godolph wouldn't let them die because they were his property. But the opponents could certainly break their bones. He asked Nixar if he had called them because he believed they could win, but Nixar just told Torres that he would practice sparring with the other instructors repeatedly to gain more experience in the next 3 days. Torres nodded in agreement. Then Nixar told Kijo that he should find a way to handle his fear and train his mentality. Then lastly, Nixar tells Kali if he needs anything he can tell him, and chosen him because of his recent improvement, so he didn't have a specific training plan for him. Upon hearing this, Kali told Nixar that he needed one person to help with his training. A moment later, Torres was being punched by someone, and the instructor advised him not to hold back because their opponents were experienced fighters. He emphasized that no matter how strong the opponents were, when Torres hit them, they would fall. The instructor also told Torres to act like a winner even if his legs were shaking and he felt like collapsing. He needed to make the opponent believe that he was an indomitable force. Then the instructor suggested taking a break and continuing later. However, Torres noticed Kali on the side, making him wonder what Kali was doing in that training field. On the other hand, the laborer named Valkyra asked Kali if he was crazy and if he really meant to throw the stone. Kali simply told Valkyra to go ahead and do it, asking what he had just said. Valkyra replied that it was nothing and that he would throw the stone. Valkyra threw the stone at Kali, but Kali easily avoided it, causing the stone to hit the wall instead. Kali understood that it was a hit-or-miss situation, one of the key aspects of modern boxing. He knew that no matter how hard he trained in 3 days, there was no way he could gain muscles. Therefore, he planned to focus on training his footwork, weaving and refining all of his reflexes, as they were his most critical weapons now. A moment later, he caught the stone that was being thrown at him while praising Valkyra for doing a good job. He told him that the training was over for the day, thinking that sharpening his body's reflexes was also a form of training for boxers. Then he arrived at their room and heard someone shouting that he would kill them all, with others trying to calm a man named Valky down. He was surprised by the situation and asked what was happening. Valky angrily told Dorman that he wouldn't forgive him. Kali asked Kijo what the hell was happening, but Kijo replied that he didn't know either. Kali urged Kijo to tell the truth because it was a serious situation. Kijo explained that fighters from Dorman's training camp had come by and mercilessly beaten them because they were angry about the match. However, there were no severe injuries, only bruises, so it was challenging for the instructors to handle. Kijo thinks they will be completely defeated. Valky shouted that Dorman and his fighters were sons of bitches and that he would kill them. Then Nixar appeared, shouting at Valky and furiously asking him if he was stupid. Nixar slapped Valky and told him that if they lost, it was over. He reminded Valky that he had already lost a fight. Nixar then encouraged them to become stronger than their opponents from now on. Kali realized that after training and living with them, he had formed a bond with his fellow trainees. He knew that from this point on, the fight wouldn't only be an event for the citizens, but also a battle for Gedo's pride, and it was the clash between 2 training camps. 3 days later, at Augusta State Arena, a spectator commented to his friend about the buzzing crowd in the stands, noting that it seemed like half of the estate's residents had gathered there. Meanwhile, Nixar instructed Kijo, Taurus, and Kali about the herbal tea in their hands, explaining it would relax them and provide strength. He advised them that if they believed they were going to lose, they should raise 2 fingers high, as it was better to have their pride hurt than to become crippled. Nixar then revealed the order. Kijo would go first, followed by Taurus and Kali. He directed Kijo to get ready, which caused Kijo to spit out his tea and nervously question if he was really going first. Nixar simply pushed him into the ring, telling him to do well in return. Kelly called out to Kijo, noticing his nervousness, and asked him why he was so tense. He advised Kijo not to let the opponent get close to him. However, Kijo was angry and questioned Kelly, stating that they needed to be close to hit their opponents. The host announced Kijo's entrance into the ring, and the crowd cheered for August. Some in the audience wondered about Kijo's height when he was an apprentice, which made Kijo anxious. The host then introduced Kijo's opponent, Bass, a warrior from the Dorman Training Center with 14 wins. Bass called Kijo a kid and remarked that having long limbs didn't necessarily make one strong, making Kijo nervously shake. Kijo's stiffness worried Torres, while Kali expressed concern for Kijo. On the other side, Joshua laughed heartily, commenting that Kijo was tall but still just a kid. Baron Joshua Dorman teased Gadolf, asking if he agreed, but Gadolf, while angered, believed that the match had yet to begin. The host announced the start of the match, and Bass immediately lunged at Kijo to attack. Bass threw a punch at Kijo, but Kijo managed to dodge it. He avoided another attack from Bass, who was smiling and eager to engage. However, the audience expressed their frustration, questioning if Kijo was a real man and whether they had come to see such a performance. Kijo, frustrated, cursed them in his thoughts, knowing that anyone could talk. Suddenly, Bass appeared right in front of Kijo, launching an attack and questioning how long Kijo intended to run away. Kijo instinctively covered his face with his hands, but Bass managed to land a punch on his chest, causing Kijo to shout in pain. Bass considered Kijo pathetic for falling for such a trick. He then followed up with a punch to Kijo's face, which made Kali, Torres, and Nixar worryingly stand up in response. Kijo fell to the ground hard, and Bass proudly raised his hands in victory. However, the audience expressed their disappointment, criticizing Kijo's performance and urging him to get up quickly or even contemplate giving up entirely. The referee began the countdown and Kijo wondered how he could possibly win. Then he looks to his side and notices that Gadolf is glaring at him. Bass was confused when he sees Kijo gets up, and Kijo knew that if he gave up, without throwing a punch, it would likely mean being kicked out of the training center. Bass, teasingly, asked if Kijo still had the will to fight, but Kijo told him to shut up and reminded himself that he was a boxer too. He told himself to calm down and follow the instructor's advice. He recalled Nixar's words, in which Nixar questioned why he lost to Kali. Nixar noted that it wasn't a fight he should have lost, especially given his advantageous physical attributes. Nixar pointed out that Kijo had failed to use his height and long limbs effectively, likely losing his composure and becoming impatient, which allowed Kali to get too close. Nixar advised him to stay calm, not be afraid, prevent the opponent from getting too close, and intercept the attacking opponent. With this advice in mind, Kijo used his long arm to punch Bass in the face, causing Bass to stumble in shock. Kali, Torres, and Nixar cheered for Kijo. Even Kijo couldn't believe that he had landed a punch successfully, but he felt confident that his fist had struck Bass. Kijo continued to punch Bass, taking advantage of the situation, while the crowd loudly cheered for him. Kali observed that Kijo was now more flexible and faster, having reduced unnecessary muscle stress, making his attacks even more threatening. Kijo's agility and speed were evident, and his attack style was akin to that of a mantis. Bass was ready to retaliate. But Kijo's height presented a challenge, and it was hard for Bass to mount a defense. Bass knew that he had to hit Kijo harder than Kijo was hitting him to secure victory. But Kijo skillfully avoided Bass's attacks and smiled, knowing he had the upper hand. Kijo launched his fist into the open space on Bass's face, delivering a powerful blow that sent Bass falling to the ground and collapsing. The crowd erupted in cheers, leaving Kijo both surprised and overwhelmed. He immediately looked for Nixar in the audience, and upon seeing Nixar nodding and smiling, Kijo raised his hand with tears in his eyes and jubilantly shouted that he had won, prompting more cheers from the spectators. Gadolf teased Joshua about their apprentice's victory and asked if Joshua had seen it. Joshua responded with frustration, reminding Gadolf that they still had 2 fighters to compete. Gadolf instructed Valkyra to convey a message to Nixar, emphasizing the consequences of losing and mentioning sending the losers to the mine. Valkyra delivered Gadolf's message, leaving Nixar frustrated. Nixar then informed Kali and Taurus about Gadolf's threat, assuring them that he would persuade Gadolf later and suggesting that if they felt in danger, they should surrender immediately. However, Taurus confidently declared that there was no need for Nixar to persuade Gadolf, as he would win. Kali noticed Taurus's determination, but he also realized that Manga, Taurus's opponent, was on a different level than Bass. Soon, Taurus and Manga faced each other in the ring. Manga offered Torres advice, noting that he was different from Bass and suggesting that Torres give up to avoid getting hurt. Torres responded by telling Manga not to say anything and challenged him to fight. When the referee initiated the match, both fighters immediately launched their fists at each other. The audience, including Kali, was shocked to see both Torres and Manga landing simultaneous punches on each other, resulting in blood being splattered around the ring. Unfortunately for Torres, Manga's strength proved superior, pushing him back. Despite the odds, Torres managed to hold his ground and exchanged punches with Manga once again, creating an exhilarating moment for the audience. Torres, with a smile, asked Manga how many hits he had taken, trying to project confidence even if he was on the verge of exhaustion. Manga acknowledged that Torres was used to facing more active fighters, but vowed not to let him win. He then launched another attack, deliberately using his elbow to hit Torres, which led to Torres bleeding. Torres confronted Manga about the elbow strike, calling it cheating. Manga brushed it off as an accidental outcome that often occurred during matches. Despite this, Torres wiped the blood from his head and replied, "Okay," while secretly seething about how the situation had unfolded. Manga thinks 18 fighter collapsed into his hands, and although he failed to become a class fighter, he was still proud to be a veteran. But Torres was only an apprentice fighter, making him wonder, why isn't Torres going down while Torres attacked him? The audience happily cheered and shouted that Torres was no different from a wild boar. Callie knows that Torres is barbaric, but is incredibly strong, and noticed that the level between Torres and Manga are different. Torres launched his fist toward falling Manga and hit him in the face hard, making Manga blood spread out everywhere, and his few teeth were pulled out. Then Manga collapsed on the ground, and he defeated Manga. Nixar praised Torres for his good work and told him that it was a great game. Also, it met the audience's expectations, but Torres just catches his breath in exhaustion and pain. He told Torres that he did a good job, but then Torres called him and told him that their victory was now based on his performance. He replied, of course, and confidently told Torres that he'd ended and come back. Then the host told everyone that the last fighter from Dorman training camp and the fighter with 11 victories named Burrito entered the stage, and the fighter from Aegis named Callie entered the stage. The audience disappointedly encouraged him that he wouldn't win and their house was bigger than him. But Valkyra cheeringly told him that they should win it, and Valkyra was surprised by his words too, so he covered his mouth without realizing that Azalea heard him. She asked Valkyra if he knew Kali, and Valkyra replied that yes, because he helps Kali during training, and Kali asked him to help throw stones at him while he avoids them. But then Joshua says that Kali was a bone, and they just let their guard down before, but he think that time they'll win easily. Adolf teasingly told Joshua that it will be disappointing if they didn't win that time, making Joshua shake in anger. Azalea was also expecting Callie to fight as she looked at him in the ring facing Burrito. Burrito apologized to him because he wouldn't let him win. Then Burrito swiftly jumped toward Callie and appeared in front of him, taking him by surprise. However, Callie managed to jump in time to avoid Burrito's attack, realizing that Burrito was faster and more dangerous than he had expected. He quickly jumped to the side to gain a better position, but was surprised to find that Burrito was blocking his movements. Realizing that he was cornered, he launched his fist to attack, knowing that he needed to escape at any cost. He landed several punches on Burrito, but Burrito told him that his punches were weak. The audience became angry and shouted at Burrito to fight properly, considering Callie just a beginner. They questioned why he wasn't using his fists, especially as a fighter with 11 wins. Burrito glanced at the audience silently, but then Callie teasingly reminded him that he wouldn't let him win, so he better use his fists properly. Burrito was aware that Callie was using the audience, and he couldn't figure out what Callie was after. However, he was determined to crush him and launched an attack. He glared at Burrito's fist, knowing that an attack was imminent. He successfully dodged Burrito's first attack, then the second, and even the third, leaving the audience shocked and Burrito confused, wondering if Callie was truly just an apprentice with such sharpened senses. Meanwhile, Joshua was furious, calling Burrito a punk, and wondering how Burrito couldn't land a single punch on Callie, who was just a skinny apprentice fighter. Azalea smiled, knowing that Callie was different from the typical apprentice fighter, silently urging him to show everyone that he was indeed unique among the fighters. Burrito was angry and attacked him again, but he noticed that Burrito always used the right jab, so he easily and quickly avoided it. Then he saw that Burrito's next attack was a left hook and a right uppercut, and he avoided all of them. He remembered Valkyra asking him why he was avoiding these punches, but he asked Valkyra if he wanted him to get hit all the time. He told him to look at his body and explained that if he got hit by those punches, he'd break into pieces. Valkyra told him that it wasn't what he meant. He explained that in the end, if he didn't punch his opponent, he wouldn't win. He explained to Valkyra that he would avoid the punches while waiting for the perfect time. This made Valkyra confused, and he asked what he meant by the perfect time. He replied that it was about watching his opponent's movements and analyzing their patterns. He figured out that Burrito would first prepare his foot for a step, move his upper body for a punch, and then he analyzed his shoulder, chest, and waist before he was ready to attack. He didn't know if his fragile body could endure the hit, but he was confident that his experience and body sense could help him win. Then he punched Burrito in the face, making Burrito's nose bleed. He followed it with a punch to Burrito's cheek, not giving Burrito a chance to recover. The audience Nixar and the masters couldn't believe that he had hit Burrito for the second time. Valkyra was also surprised, thinking about analyzing patterns because he saw that Callie had really done it. Burrito was on his knees, wondering how it could happen. He told Burrito in his head not to stand up because he couldn't use his right hand anymore, and that he should give up so they could move forward. However, Burrito furiously slammed his hand on the ground and stood up, calling him a son of a bitch. This left him in a position of frustration. Burrito told him that he was like a rat and that he would crush him without him realizing that Burrito was holding sand in his hand. Then Burrito threw sand into his eyes, thinking that no matter how fast he was, if he couldn't see, it would be his end, as Aaliyah shouted that it was cheating. But Joshua just told her that it was Kali's fault for not being careful, and it was natural that when they fell, they got sand in their hands. On the other hand, Kali was frustrated because he really couldn't get used to the boxing fight there. He tried to open his eyes, but it hurt too much. Suddenly, Burrito punched his face, sending him flying into the distance. Burrito told him that he was nasty, but he just stood up with his eyes closed and faced Burrito once again. Burrito ran toward him, shouting that it was the end, but he didn't move from his position, knowing that he needed to stay calm because his analysis was already done. He knew that Burrito always starts with the right jab. Then he launched his fist toward Burrito and punched him in the face with all his might, making Burrito bleed and slowly fall. Burrito collapsed to the ground, defeated. The referee began to count down, and when the referee hit 0 and Burrito didn't stand up, he raised his hand in victory, shouting, making Azalea shocked. She had come all the way there to experience that sensation. Nixar patted his head and proudly told him that he couldn't believe they had won. Therein, Josh Abdurrahman, whose pride had fallen, left the territory quickly, and Gadolf, who felt joy, gave them 3 whole pigs as rewards. 2 months later, the harvest season had come. Kijo put down a box of vegetables on the ground and angrily asked if they were farmers or fighters. He told Kijo that he was complaining too much and should think of it as strength training. Also, Kali's body had gone through many changes. A moment later, he placed the last box of vegetables on the table and the farmer smiled, telling him he did a good job. The farmer suggested he take some with him, to which Kali thanked him. Then the farmer asked if they were going to the harvest festival of Duke Wesley, and Kijo replied no because they were still apprentices. So they had to wait another year to go. The farmer said it was too bad because he wanted to see their matches again. He asked Kijo what they were planning to do at the harvest festival as he waved goodbye. Kijo responded by asking if he was silly and explained that the highlight of the harvest festival is boxing, and their master is one of the Duke's relatives. Kijo further mentioned that Dorman and August were competing under his sponsorship, with Dorman currently having the upper hand. He pretended to remember, but Kijo teasingly asked him if he'd been hit on the head hard before. Kali then glanced back at the mansion, realizing it had been a year. Meanwhile, in August's mansion reception room, Nixar tried to persuade Gadolf to give him 1 more year. He told Gadolf that the last match was well prepared, but that he was lucky. Gadolf, in response, mentioned that a letter had arrived from the Duke's house, and they must have heard about their last victory. The Duke wanted to see the 3 apprentices, and if they refused, it wouldn't be good for them. Nixar understood that Duke Wesley was one of the 5 dukes in the kingdom, and they couldn't possibly refuse. He replied, "I understand." Gadolf told him that they would depart for the Duke's house with an escort the day after tomorrow, so they should get ready. From now on, those 3 were official boxers, so he should mark them. A moment later, Kali felt that the mark on his shoulder was still sore, but as long as he could box, it didn't matter. Then, they continued on their journey. Suddenly, someone congratulated Kali for becoming an official boxer, as Aaliyah told him that thanks to him, she could walk alongside the nobles. He asked her if she was talking about him, and she replied yes, for which he thanked her. She stared at him, making him confused. But then she told him that he had changed a lot and should show his training results at the harvest festival. Kijo asked him if their lady wasn't pretty and mentioned that her red hair and full lips showed her beauty from afar. Kali remembered her expressions and realized that she was indeed pretty. Torres told Kijo to watch his mouth unless he wanted to face their master's anger, but Kijo asked Torres what he was so worried about and suggested that Torres actually liked him. This made Torres angry, and he attacked Kijo from behind. Kijo told Torres he got the message defeatedly. The knights told them to be quiet. The night arrived, and the captain of the knights told everyone that they should stop there to take a break and then leave. Kijo, irritated, asks why they are going around the mountain, and the bugs are sticking to him. He just asks Kijo back, who would have known that the bridge collapsed because of the rainstorm. Kijo asks them back, what if bandits show up? On the other hand, inside the carriage, Gadolf tells Aelia that the sun sets quickly in the mountains, so she should go to sleep first. Then Gadolf told the captain of the knights that they'd leave early tomorrow morning, and the knight replied that it was harvest season now, so the bandits were rampant. He should hurry, but Gadolf asked the captain of the knights if it wasn't because of those bandits that he pays them. While they were busy talking, he heard something and wondered if it was a rustling sound. Teo shouted that something moved in the bushes, and he told Gadolf that they should leave now, making Gadolf ask them what it was and where they thought they were going. Suddenly, someone threw something at the captain of the knights, and a swarm of sharp arrows flew in their direction. Gadolf, panicky, shouted that it was an attack, and the knight immediately protected Gadolf. Nixar, who was hiding in the bush, told them to come there, but he noticed that the arrow shower stopped and saw that there were too many bandits approaching them. He told Nixar that they didn't have enough soldiers, so if he unlocked their chains, they'd fight with him, to which Taurus and Kijo agreed too. Nixar got the key to their chains and freed them while telling them to only subdue the ones who approached them, and protecting Gadolf and the lady is their priority. Suddenly, one of the bandits attacked Kijo with a sword while shouting that he found them. Unfortunately, he blocked it in time with the chain on his wrist and punched the man in the face. He told them not to just stand there and they should go. Torres wrapped the chain around his arm while saying that Kali was a crazy bastard, and Kijo told Torres that Kali was definitely not an ordinary guy. On the other hand, he was running fast toward the carriage, knowing that he had to find Gadolf and Aelia. The knights grabbed Gadolf, who was trying to free himself from them, but the knight told him that they had to go quickly, making him realize that Gadolf is safe. But then Gadolf shouted that Aelia was still in the carriage, making him surprised and immediately run toward it. But he noticed that one of the bandits was already approaching it, so he shouted to the man to stop. The man just smiled at him and swung the sword at him. Fortunately, he blocked it using the chain on his arm. But he still got thrown to the ground hard, realizing that the man had strong power. Then the man opened the carriage door, making Aelia surprised and shout in fear, which he heard. Then the man came out of the carriage, holding a collapsed Aelia in his hand. When he saw Aelia didn't move, he shouted and wordly called her name. Then the man ran away speedily while holding Aelia. Gadolf asked the knights what they were doing and ordered them to help Aelia. However, the knight didn't move and told Gadolf that he'd be back in a bit. A few minutes later, the man ran toward the cliff while he was telling him to stop and that there was nowhere else to go. The man put down Aelia while telling him that he looked like a slave and pointed the sword at him while asking if he wanted to come with them. He just asked the man why he would point a sword at him when recruiting him and told the man that if he comes with him, would end up doing nothing more than banditry. The man positioned himself and told him that it was the end of the story. He noticed that it was a train move and asked the man if he was a gladiator. The man jumped toward him to attack him while telling him that he was a gladiator with 42 wins. He knew that it was impossible to fight the man head on, making him wonder if he should fight him or pass him. The man swung his blade at him, but he jumped back in time to avoid it. Then he speedily ran toward Aelia, making the man surprised. But he just grabbed Aelia from ground and told the man that he felt sorry for him because he had no intention of fighting while jumping off the cliff with Aelia. Then they fell into the ocean, leaving the man alone looking at them. A moment later, he called Aelia to wake up and was glad that she was breathing. She slowly opened her eyes and sat up in shock, making him glad that she had regained consciousness. He asked her if she was all right. A few minutes later, he told her what had happened, and she told him that she clearly remembered that one-eyed man who hit her. While he was busy thinking that he never thought he would use the camouflage techniques he learned in the military there, she told him that they should at least light some fire, but he told her that it was not possible because the trees were all moist, and worst of all, they might get caught, making her say that he was incompetent. He was surprised when he saw her shaking from the cold and thought that her body temperature must have dropped a lot because of the wet clothes. He told her that if she kept wearing wet clothes, she would catch a cold, and she'd feel less cold if she took off her clothes. This made her shyly ask him if he was telling her to take off her clothes and called him a shameless bastard. He assured her that he didn't mean it that way. He was just saying that it's better than freezing to death, and he'd turn his back. She told him that he had become quite bold, and he replied that it was because right now he had to protect her, and if anything happened to her, Gadolf would kill him. She told him not to look back, and that she'd kill him if he turned around, to which he agreed. The truth was his head was spinning as he heard her taking off her clothes. Then he asked her if she was feeling less cold, but she still shivered from the cold. She noticed that even though he was freezing, he could see his lips turning blue and his body was shaking with cold. He told her there were two ways to warm up, either move their bodies to raise body temperature or stick their bodies together. She replied that it was okay and she was fine, but then she was surprised to see him doing push-up from the ground. He stood up and excused himself to her. Suddenly, he put his arm around her, which made her surprised, and she shyly asked him what he was doing. He reminded her that he had told her they needed to stick their bodies together because it was said to be a way for soldiers to endure the cold during winter marches. He told her that she might not like it, but if something happened to her, he'd be in trouble. She silently sat next to him. The next morning, he told her that it seemed safe around there and asked if she could walk. She asked him if he was going to carry her if she couldn't, making him realize that Azalea was still acting tough. Suddenly, her stomach growled with hunger, and she shyly said she couldn't help it because she hadn't eaten anything since last night. Later, near the river, he asked her if she'd like to have some. Then he cut the raw fish he had caught in the river and gave her a piece of its meat. At first, she felt disgusted, but when she tasted it, her expression changed. After that, they continued to walk, and he told her that if they headed upstream, they'd be able to rejoin their group. She asked him what if they encountered the bandits first, but he told her to leave it to luck, making her say that it was irresponsible. He assured her that he always did his best, and after all, he was just wishing her luck. She thought that Callie was not like a slave or a typical boy. He was enigmatic and seemed to learn things in his unique way. She shyly told him that the more she knew him, the more mysterious he became. Meanwhile, a man was furious because he was trying to secure the ransom, but that little bastard appeared. He swore that he'd kill him if he saw him again. Suddenly, the man heard footsteps from behind, and he immediately stood up upon hearing someone saying that they would meet the soldiers soon. Then the man opened the grass in front of him and saw Azalea, telling Callie that it was the third time she had heard that sound. The man thought it was a heaven-sent opportunity. Callie and Azalea were surprised when they heard someone saying that they said even tigers would come if they told them to. The man told Callie that it was really nice to meet him. He faced the man to protect Azalea, and the man asked him if he was planning to fight him without even a weapon, calling him a laughable bastard. The man was surprised to hear the man tell him that he'd kill him and take that special prize. Then the man asked Azalea why she didn't have a chat with him before he sold her, making her shake in fear. He told the man that he was dreaming too high and asked him who said he was going to let him take her. He thought that the chains had floated away when he fell into the river, so depending on them was impossible for him. The man teasingly called him a little boy and told him that they should cut him down first. Then the man swung his sword toward him, and fortunately, he avoided it, but it cut his hair and his clothes. The man told him that he was fast and teasingly asked him how long he could avoid it. Then the man continuously attacked him with the sword, and he continuously avoided the strikes. However, when the man turned his body around, he didn't dodge the man's kick because he didn't expect it, and he slammed onto the ground hard, making his Alia wordly shout to him to watch out. He was surprised that the sword was near his face, but luckily he rolled to the side in time to avoid it, and he immediately stood up. He realized that the sword had high killing power and long range, but he already knew about the law of destruction. He knew that against a player with long arms, guns, and knives, if he wanted to win with his bare hands, he had no choice but to move forward. The man teasingly told him that he understood that he was sticking his neck out. But Azalea knew that the man was wrong. The man swung his sword at him, but he speedily jumped to the man's side to avoid the attack and found an open space. He then punched the man's side, making the man growl in pain. The man swung his blade toward him in anger while shouting that they should take it to the end. He jumped backward to avoid it, knowing that what he needed now was the courage to face the blade, and his nose was lightly cut by the sword. He also knows that he needs determination to move forward. The man once again slashes in his direction, but he jumps to the side, and the man notices that he is aiming for his blind spot. Then he punches the man in the jaw, making the man cough up blood. Straight away, he grabs the man's shoulder and slams him hard on the ground, making the man shout in pain. He doesn't stop and punches the man in the face, elbows the man, and continuously punches him until he's exhausted and can't move anymore. He leans against a nearby tree while the man is badly beaten near another tree. The man still tries to grab his sword next to him and furiously swears that he'd definitely kill Callie. Then a shadow appears in front of the man and grabs his sword, making the man panic. As Alia lifts the sword and says that the man tried to disgrace her, and then she stabs the man with the sword, leaving Callie surprised. Shakingly, she tells him that even killing the man 100 times is not enough, which leaves him stunned and realizing that his alias is not normal either. After dealing with the boss, they were found by the rescue team and were able to return safely. Nixar, who was applying ointment to his cut, told him that he was lucky because if he had cut a little higher, he would have been blind. He teasingly told Nixar that he looked more manly and nice. Suddenly, someone called him, and Gedolf thanked him for saving his daughter. He couldn't believe that Gedolf was thanking a slave, and he replied that it was his duty. Gedolf told him to sit down and rest, and made it clear that it was an order because he deserved it, and had the right to do so. Then Gedolf angrily says that those pathetic knights don't know what even a young slave knows, while glaring at the knights behind him. Gedolf then tells him that it's amazing that he fought and won against a gladiator. He asks if he has any secrets, and he replies that it helps to look weak because they always underestimate him. They rescued Azalea from the bandits and earned their loyalty. They were able to ride in a carriage, and finally, they arrived at the Wesley Duchy. Duke Wesley cheerfully told Gedolf that it had been a long time since they had seen each other, and that they had traveled a long way. Gedolf thanked Wesley. Wesley noticed that Azalea was there too, and told her that she had become a lady who looked just like her mother. She replied that she was honored that he remembered her while he stood behind her. Before that, she told him that one of the servants was sick in bed, so he'd have to serve instead. He was the best fit because the others had ugly faces and bulky bodies that couldn't be made into servants. A minute later, the nobles were sitting at a long table. Wesley asked Gedolf if it was true that August won all 3 matches in the last boxing match, and told him that he heard they were all apprentices. Gedolf replied that it was embarrassing and those apprentices were now official boxers. Then the nobles began to chat with each other, making Azalea feel left out and sigh in boredom. Then she whispered something to her father and ordered Kali to follow her, making him surprised but replying with a yes. Later, they were out on the street and she said that she thought she was going to suffocate and die. She told him that she didn't want to come in the first place, so they should let them talk among themselves. He told her that she looked unhappy. She told him that her father is obsessed with finding her a husband and asked him if it isn't horrible to be tied down at a young age. He told her that what he thinks doesn't matter, making her sigh. Then she saw 2 candies and gave one to him, asking if he had never tasted it before, making him realize that he hadn't eaten anything sweet except fruits since he came to that world. He put the lollipop in his mouth and told her that it was delicious. She beautifully reminds him that she told him, and he shyly replies with a yes. He thinks that she was born with beauty, otherwise she wouldn't get so much attention. But then he notices an old woman and wonders why she is staring at him. The old woman asks Azalea if she can read her fortune, and he tells her that they should go. But she replies no, because it sounds fun, and she has never had her fortune read before, so they should go see it. Then they follow the old woman, who is laughing and telling her that she'd give her a cheap price. Azalea looks around and excitedly says that it's the gypsy tent she had only heard of. While he is busy wondering what the old woman is up to, The old woman tells Azalea that her life is not sailing smoothly, and there will be many twists and turns. She replies that it's good, and it would be boring if her life were like everyone else's. Then she also tells the old woman to look at her marriage or love fortune too, making Kali realize that whether it's there or on Earth, fortune-telling can drive people crazy. The old woman tells her that her partner might be close by, but she won't be able to have the love that everyone blesses her with, making her blush and leaving Kali confused. Then the old woman offers to read that boy's fortune for her as a service. He initially replies no and says he's fine. She tells him not to be cold and that it's for free. Also, he has nothing to lose, so he sits down, and the old woman begins to read his fortune using the crystal ball. The old woman sighs and tells him that he has come from very far away, from a place that people there can't even imagine, making him surprised. He asks the old woman where he came from. The old woman replies that she doesn't know it and she just says what she sees. Azalea asks the old woman what she sees, and she replies that she sees a metal that flies in the sky, a carriage that moves without a horse, and a human inside a box. He stands up in shock, wondering what the old woman is saying and if she sees a glimpse of his past. The old woman told him that there was an unusual energy hanging over him, and he seemed to have an angel by his side. Azalea told him that he had the fortune to become a fighter, and maybe that's why he had one so far. He told her that it was just a superstition, and if she believed it, she would be a fool. She poutingly looked at him and said she also knew that, and he should not cross the line because he was just a slave. Panicky, he apologized to her, while the old woman couldn't believe that he was just a slave because she knew that a man with that kind of energy wouldn't end up just becoming a slave. In the next 3 days, he needed to soothe Azalea's anger, and finally, he went back to the slave dorm. He thought he could train as soon as he arrived, but the knights teasingly asked him if he was a real fighter because he was a skinny guy. They told him that even his dog could be a fighter, making him wonder why these guys were picking a fight with him. He asked them if he could just go in, but one of the knights told him that he would if he crawled under his foot, while the other one laughed hard. He asked them if they had ever been hit by a fighter and told them to stop picking a fight with him. One of the knights got pissed and asked how a slave like him dared to be arrogant, then launched a spear at him. But then someone shouted at the knight to stop and asked what it was. The knights were shocked to see Wesley behind him and asked Wesley how a slave could come to a citizen's place. Wesley told them that Kali belonged to his customer, Baron Aegis, and asked them if they wanted to stain his face, leaving the knight stunned in fear. Wesley told him that when he first saw him, he didn't believe he was a fighter, and asked if he was one of the fighters who defeated Dorman's fighter. He replied yes, but he jumped in shock when Wesley touched his body and told him that his shoulder muscles were strong. Still, he didn't believe he was one of the fighters who defeated them. Then Wesley asked him what he was hiding, making him shock. But Wesley quickly smiled and apologized to him, saying he was just really excited to meet one of the fighters. Then he told him that he'd stop now before it got boring. Wesley walked away, telling him that he would see him at the match, leaving him wondering what the hell it was. Later, in the accommodation for the slaves and fighters, he was training. Thinking that when he had so many things on his mind, he expected that training was the best. He was doing a push-up with one hand, upside down. Suddenly, someone called him, and Torres teasingly asked him if it was nice to live in the castle for 3 days. He replied that he was dying of frustration. Nixar told them that the place they were standing was a big one, bigger than their previous training area. It's not only dormant slave fighters training camp, but also stray fighters, so if they were lucky they might not play, and they might be left because the round is full. Torres asked Nixar if they were on the lucky side, and Nixar replied that for now they were, but they were 100 years early to deal with the other fighters gathered there. Torres asked Nixar if he was telling him to stay still in the training camp when he was ready to win everything now. Nixar looked at Torres for seconds and sighed in frustration. Suddenly, Nixar kicked Torres in the stomach and angrily asked Torres if it was funny when they were probably going to end up dead before their debut. Then he told Torres not to joke around and explained the fact that there are many boxers who have won dozens of times in a row, which means dozens of boxers were buried underneath. So, if it's not because of the match, he'll kill them with his hands. Torres stood up and told Nixar that he'll keep it in mind and apologize to him. Nixar told them that no matter how good a fighter was, they lose focus sometimes during the match, which is why he was worried about Kijo. but Kijo shouted that he was okay. Suddenly they heard someone shout that it was an ogre and Dorman's ogre had come, making Nixar shocked and immediately turn around to look at it. Then they saw a huge guy in the center of the other men, and Nixar said that Joshua had sharpened his sword, and he couldn't believe that Joshua brought that ogre. Kijo fearfully asked what the hell it was and if it was a human. Nixar replied that people compared him to be at the same level as a monster. Kelly wondered if the huge guy is a person, and doesn't that guy really look like an ogre from a fantasy world while looking at Dorman's ogre, a fierce fighter who has won 76 times in a year? Kijo counted the 76 wins in 1 year, and Nixar told Kijo that the ogre must have fought 3 to 4 times a day. Nixar told him that there are rumors that ogres can rip someone's ribs off with just their bare hands, and asked them if it made sense that the guy was called an ogre. Kijo wordly asked Nixar if they wouldn't be in danger, and if their master couldn't do something about it because if they fought the ogre, they might die. Nixar told them that actually their master said it was too early to let them fight the ogre, so there was a possibility that they wouldn't have to go up against it. Torres said that it was interesting, and the guy's nickname, Ogre, doesn't feel like an exaggeration at all. It's like they're dealing with a different species, which left Kijo stunned in fear. But then Kijo tried to laugh and asked Callie if he didn't want to fight the ogre like him. However, Callie replied that if his fist didn't touch the ogre's jaw, he'd need to make the ogre bend his body, but he wondered how. He guessed that maybe he'd lose his stamina first, but thought that hitting other parts wouldn't do much damage because the size difference was so great. Honestly, he couldn't think of a way to fight the ogre. Tejo wondered if they were crazy and if they really wanted to fight that monster. He also noticed that Kali sometimes felt different and had some barbaric side, making him think that Kali was different from an ordinary human. Later, the nobles gathered in front of the task board, and someone told them that it was the match schedule, so they should check if it was written correctly. Joshua told Godolph that it would be tough and they would meet again this time. Joshua teasingly told Godolph that everyone would give up in front of the ogre, but Godolph just laughed and told Joshua to see the match later. Nixar praised Godolph and told him that if he fell for Joshua's provocation, he would only lose his fighters. Godolph replied that he also knew it, and wondered who was crazy enough to fight a monster like the ogre, knowing the reason why Dorman Ogre is so famous. Joshua teasingly told Godolph that he was trying to give respect to the 3 fighters last time, and they would see. Nixar asked Godolph what Joshua meant and if he wanted the 3 of them to die. Godolph replied that he heard Joshua made his 3 fighters fight the ogre, so Joshua must be serious this time. But Nixar knew that it was actually a death sentence for them. Godolph asked Nixar if they didn't come there to see the match schedule, and Nixar replied yes. Then Nixar told Godolph that Torres was on the first day, Callie and Kijo were on the second day. Also, the ogre was on the first day, but he had no fight with them. Godolph told Nixar that it was a pity for the other Baron's fighter who would face the ogre, to which Nixar agreed. The first day match at Wistry Stadium had the man stunned in fear as he faced the enormous ogre. He pleaded with Ogre not to come any closer, and his fear forced him to retreat, eventually pinning himself inside the ring. In front of him stood Ogre, glaring menacingly. Ogre launched a punch to attack the man, and by sheer luck, the man ducked to evade it. But as he cautiously looked back, he saw that the ring pillar had been obliterated. Joshua scolded Ogre, calling him a troublemaker, and he had asked Ogre not to destroy the pillar. Joshua smiled and apologized to Wesley while secretly praising Ogre in his mind, urging him to show everyone what he was made of. Callie told Kijo that he could understand why the man had earned the nickname Ogre. To him, Ogre doesn't feel like a human at all. The man sat trembling in fear on the ring, while the crowd cheered for Ogre to kill his opponent, making the man sweat uncontrollably. The terrified man attempted to surrender and let Ogre win, but Ogre ignored his plea. Instead, Ogre launched his fist towards the man, causing the man to scream in fear. Upon impact, blood splattered everywhere, further inciting the cheers of the spectators. Kelly had witnessed many deaths in fights prior to coming to this place, but he had never seen anything as gruesome as this. Ogre's bare hands turned the fight into a brutal spectacle, like a battle between a human and a beast. Fortunately, Ogre didn't possess any refined fighting skills. At this point, Kijo called his name and inquired if he was still trying to figure out how to fight Ogre. Kelly replied negatively, realizing that they might not even get the chance to fight Ogre. Heijo urged them to stop entertaining such thoughts, emphasizing that fighting someone like Ogre would result in certain defeat. Torres agreed and pointed out that Ogre was not merely looking to win the fight, but to kill his opponents. Aegis Wild Boars, Torres never gives up. He knocks down his opponent after giving his best on the last match that day. He knows that the next day he will fight there, but then someone asks him if he likes boys, and he replied that he certainly does not. Then Azalea asks if she was calling just to ask that simple question. She replied that usually boys can't talk when they see her face, so she asked him because he seemed too calm. She asked if he wasn't nervous. Then she told him that she heard many fighters died on the first day of the match, and maybe she wouldn't see him again starting tomorrow. He told her he was not a noble like her, so he had nothing to lose. She told him he was pretty good at talking, maybe because he was a fighter. She asked him if that's why he was good at talking. She tossed an apple toward him, saying that if he wins tomorrow, she'll dedicate herself to him as his victory. He confidently told her not to worry because he'll win. The next day, people hit the drum, indicating the event was starting. The audience on the stage screamed in excitement. He was glad that it was finally starting, while Nixar noticed that his body had changed so much. His back and shoulder muscles were getting bigger than before. Then the host began to introduce the veteran fighter with 21 wins in Vatamon training camp, the Iron Wall, Caesar. The host told everyone that Caesar's opponent looked like a dwarf, but the rookie had already won one fight against an experienced fighter, Callie, the next fighter from Aegis training camp. The audience angrily asked if they thought they came all the way there to see a terrible fight, and if Callie was eating properly because he looked like someone from a poor family. On the other hand, Azalea wished for Callie to win the fight, but suddenly someone behind her told her that the result was too obvious. A nobleman told her that fighter Caesar was gaining recognition these days, and maybe Caesar would become the champion in the future. She knew she had nothing to do there, which is why she hated coming there, but she smilingly told the man that she thought the boy from their side would win. Still, the man confidently told her that physics is absolute in boxing. He didn't know if he ever told her, but in the past he also had to fight someone. She smiled in response but wondered why that pathetic man was bragging. She told the man they should make a bet, and her bet was on Callie. She told the man that if Callie loses, she'll spend time with him tomorrow. This made the man light up in surprise and agree. Then the man asked her what she wanted to do if he lost. She replied that she saw a nice ruby necklace at the craft shop she went to yesterday. The man replied okay and told her that it was an interesting bet. This made him wonder why it was so easy and if she thought he was interested in her, and she knew that she was making a bet that he certainly would lose. Caesar told Callie that he'd win easily this time and blamed his master for putting him in that match. But Callie just sighed in frustration about Caesar and the other man he fought before. Then he asked Caesar if they fight with their mouths and confidently told him to bring it on. Caesar furiously ran toward him and tried to punch him, but he avoided it as he expected. He knew that Caesar had iron-like muscles and thick skin, so he wouldn't go down easily if he hit his jaw. Caesar punched him with his other hand, but he ducked in time and jumped backward to create a space between them. Caesar told him that he must be good at dodging, and then Caesar inhaled, thinking that he'd make sure Callie couldn't dodge anymore. He was surprised when Caesar speedily and continuously attacked him using his two fists. The man told his Aaliyah that it ended like that and their bet was done. But then the other noble guy shouted in surprise, and the audience was shocked too to see Callie speedily avoiding Caesar's fast attack. The man was shocked and wondered what the hell was happening. Caesar thought it was impossible, and the nobleman was surprised to hear people asking if Callie was the fighter who knocked down Dorman's fighter, and said that they heard Callie won with his eyes closed. The man asked if it was true, but Azalea just looked at Callie, smiling and humming. On the other hand, Callie was busy fighting while wondering if he could knock Caesar down in one shot, if he had to stack up the damage and break Caesar's muscles, and if his stamina would last until then. Then he noticed Caesar's back and liver. Caesar tiredly called him a brat, but he kept silent, knowing he couldn't miss that chance. Then he jumped towards Caesar and punched him in the liver. He was surprised to feel it, and he knew it went in. Nixar stood up in shock to witness it because he knew that the punch Callie threw in the middle of an explosive dash was a perfect weight shift. Nixar thought it seemed like Callie had reaped the fruits of his constant muscle training because Callie did something he couldn't even dream of with his original weak body. But it was not an attack based on the opponent's movement and weight utilization. it was a punch delivered with Callie's pure strength. Caesar's body shook in pain. But before Caesar could attack again, Callie punched him in the jaw, making Nixar smile and telling Callie in his mind that he has grown. The audience started to cheer for Callie, telling him to keep pushing and that he was not bad for a little one. Then the nobleman next to Azalea stood in disbelief. Callie felt hurt in his hand and noticed that the thick muscle armor on Caesar's body was breaking apart. Caesar shook in anger and shouted, launching his fist at him. But he speedily dodged it and went behind Caesar, then punched his back, making Caesar clench his teeth in pain. Caesar thought it was not a normal punch because it was a spear that pierced through everything, a sharp spear. Then Callie Spidoli went in front of Caesar and punched him in the face, making Azalea and Nixar proud. He was thinking that there, he had recreated his life. Then he gave his last punch on Caesar's face, making Caesar bleed and collapse, then fall to the ground. He caught his breath, then raised his hand as a victory, making the audience cheer for him. The nobleman shouted that it was impossible, but Azalea just told the man that she won after all, and she is looking forward to the necklace, making the man walk away in shyness. Thinking that if only Caesar fought more decently, it would have been less humiliating for him. Suddenly, Gadolf appeared behind her and shouted that Callie was his boxer. He raised Callie with care, but then Gadolf noticed Callie facing them and punched his chest with his fist as a sign of respect, then raised his hand in front of them. Gadolf thought Callie was dedicating it to him, and Callie knows how to be grateful, but the truth is, as Alien knows it was for her, and Callie was telling her that he did it. The audience loudly cheered for him, while he thought that he had become stronger.